Hawaii would have been in the news in any case. It is the 80th anniversary of the devastating sneak attack by the Japanese fascist regime on the US Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. Everyone knows that that's what brought the United States into the Second World War. So it was the very best example of a self-harming act by the Japanese. It would always excite comment, an auspicious anniversary such as that. But not one, but two deep and divisive controversies are racking Hawaii at exactly the same time as the 80th anniversary. So we've asked a former Hawaiian lawmaker, Kaniela Ing, to talk to us about Pearl Harbor and about those two controversies, and he's been kind enough to join us. Kaniela, thank you for coming on board the Sputnik. Let's talk about Pearl Harbor first. To what extent is that still emblematic in your part of the world?
Yeah, aloha, Aina, George, and thanks for having me. My grandpa was a World War II veteran. He was a Japanese American, actually. So he had to fight for a country that was being very racist towards him at the time and kicking people like him out, forcing them into internment camps, and actually stand on their side in this war. It's personal to me. It's in my family. And, we say never forget, like always remember December 7th. But I think the lesson that we're learning now, and we're starting to see a lot more clearly, is that being occupied by military and being the center, like a nucleus for military bases, doesn't always make you safer. It oftentimes makes you a target. And in the case of what's happening right now, where the military has poisoned our water with petroleum, it's a stark example of how we're sometimes forced to defend ourselves against those who are supposed to defend us.
Well, a very good segue, in fact. But before we focus in on it, is there a feeling in Hawaii that the islands and the people there are really just being used by the United States rather than being fully a part of the American family? It is a state, it's the 50th state, Hawaii 5-0. I remember it from my youth. But is it something just to be used by Washington?
I think there's mixed sentiments out there. Growing up, like I'm from the working class. I'm also Native Hawaiian. But very early on, you're in an American education system. You're taught that we're always the good guys, that we're better off. The military provides jobs and all the things. But when we really investigate what sorts of jobs, that's first of all, can civilians even apply for them? Are they being outsourced? Is it okay morally to have our livelihoods based on the deaths and destruction of others abroad, literally displacing other Native people? And the fact that these are government jobs, we could direct that money to any other purpose. It doesn't have to be war. It can be something positive like green jobs, future jobs, and aloha aina-based economy. People are starting to get it more. But yeah, we're raised to believe that the military is like here to take care of us. I almost joined myself as someone from the working class and needing to try to rise up because it is a socialized system in a brutal capitalist world.
Now, let's talk about the Red Hill petrol leak that you alluded to there. This is probably the bigger of the two controversies, though both are important. But this is attracting attention now all over the world. This is the US Defense Department poisoning the water of its own people in Hawaii. Tell us.
Yeah, so just yesterday, we were out at a rally where a few hundred people came out in the middle of a workday to the state capitol to demand that they drain the tanks. And most of these organizers and activists were actually demanding that the Navy leave the islands. They've overstayed their welcome. And, the argument here is there's these giant tanks of jet fuel that were buried underground during World War II, speaking of Pearl Harbor, to hide it from the enemy. It makes no sense to keep that there. It's based on strategy of a foreign a really old war, but it's still there, and it's right above an aquifer that provides water to 20% of the island, so tens and thousands of people, and it leaked in. And it probably was happening for a long time, but we just kind of found out now, and it's really blowing up. And the Navy is mishandling it in every turn, kind of spewing lies, backtracking, making up something else, backtracking again, and it's getting out of hand. We're seeing babies being rushed to the hospital, literal petroleum in elementary school water fountains. Over nearly 3,000 of the military's own families had to evacuate their homes.
And what kind of health damage, impact has these leaks caused?
It's unknown, but we do know that the data, there's no really tracking it. It's hard to really, see the impacts directly, but, there are people that had to leave their homes, and the level of contaminants in the water are, I think it was the last measurement from the Department of Health was 250 times the safe limit of petroleum. So it's bad.
And that petrol has been down there since the Second World War. Has there been a campaign to get them to drain it? Is it technically feasible to drain it?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it's in their budget. And that was the first excuse when people started demanding drain the tanks. They said, well, it's going to cost billions of dollars. Well, the Congress just cut you a $766 billion check this year. I'm pretty sure you can find the budget to make sure that your own troops and their families have clean water. So there's a lot of false excuses that are coming from the Navy right now. And for the first time, at least in my lifetime, the public is seeing right through it. Generally, the default is to support the military because of our conditioning. But when it comes to clean water, it's kind of morally reprehensible to be on the other side of this.
Elementary, indeed. What has President Biden said on the subject?
I don't believe there was any word from the White House yet. There was our congressional delegation sent letters out. There were a delegation of Native Hawaiian leaders who wrote a letter to President Biden. So we're expecting something soon. I don't think there's any excuse morally for him to stay silent on this.
Now, of course, there's another controversy, the Mauna Kea space telescope, which is we're all in favor of space telescopes, just like we're all in favor of military jobs, but they come with a cost, don't they? This is being built on a sacred place. Tell us about that.
Yeah, this is actually an ongoing fight that's been happening since at least 2015, where they first started to move equipment up the mountain, and a group of Native Hawaiians, Kanaka Maoli, actually laid their bodies down on the cattle guard to block it. And so they stopped it then, and they tried again in 2019, and that's when it really blew up. And there's an occupation there that was sustaining thousands of people, thousands of Native Hawaiians coming up, kind of making the pilgrimage and staying out there for months through the winter. And we won. So far, we've won because we were actually able to take a physical stance. And it's sort of a lesson we're learning that, just doing what they tell us to do, to show up in hearings and to vote isn't enough. We have to really escalate if we want to win. And history shows, especially in American movements, that if you're not willing to take that next step of actually, taking direct action, you're not going to see real change. So, that's been going on since 2019, and there are still folks holding it down.
Now, you were a lawmaker for quite some time, a member of the local Congress in Hawaii. Do these things get properly consulted on, or is the U.S. acting in Hawaii more or less as in a peremptory way without properly consulting and winning the consent of people?
The history of paternalism in Hawaii is stark and overtly racist, and that continues on today. Every time there seems to be some sort of progress with the rhetoric, at least, what we see in the actions that the military and the U.S. government takes in Hawaii, there's very little room for actual decision making at any level, even as a state legislator, even the governor at times, like whenever the head of Pacific Command or some general comes down, that we roll out the red carpet as lawmakers. So there is that sort of vibe that makes us feel like we're a colony or an occupied nation, which technically and legally we are.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds from what you're saying that the native Hawaiians are getting a bit restless. Is there any feeling in the islands that actually you'd be better off, as it were, as an independent people?
There is that feeling. There are a lot of folks that believe that independence could be a way to go. I mean, you've been through this, George, right? And when you look at places like Hawaii that had similar histories with the U.S. that either got independence or statehood or in some kind of limbo, you can look at Hawaii, Guam, and Philippines, which have all three examples right there, and see who's really better off. Independence, legal independence, or like political independence doesn't really mean anything if you don't have real power, if you're still attached to the U.S. military or the U.S. economy. So I think we really need to be strategic and focus more on building power and to really achieve self-determination. Now, independence is a good, lofty goal, but again, it doesn't mean much if you're still going to have military bases on your island, like you see in the Philippines.
But you've got a senator, right, in Washington? Sounds to me like you'd be a good one.
We have 2 congresspeople. We have 2 senators. I did run for Congress. I didn't quite make it in 2018. I was 28 years old, so maybe there's going to be an opportunity down the line.
Well, you look 28 years old now. Kaniela Ing, thank you for joining us on board the Sputnik.